The week after, next week is 6. Right. But I wouldn't want to go far. When you say you, I mean really, I cook great. But I don't yes. So I can't. But big parts of your that's all.
Hi, Mike. This call is your girlfriend? Yeah. top Jewish activity is Jewish activism. He knows everyone from the second grade on.
We're going to get started shortly. Thank you for those joining us online. If someone can in the chat box just say that they can hear us, that would be wonderful as well.
Yes, but also to my sister.
Oh, just start. Speak into them. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Shoshana Nat, and I'm part of the Israel Engagement Committee, and we're hosting tonight's event. The Israel Engagement Committee was formed out of our collective love of the land, the culture, the history of Israel, as well as the understanding the vital role that Israel plays in the safety and the future of the Jewish people. Our goal is to celebrate everything there is to love about Israel with our Temple Emanu-El community. And we want to ensure that our young members of our temple are also educated about Israel. And while we wish all of our events could be very joyous, happy celebrations, with the frightening rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, we know that it's also crucial to inform our community on the truth of what's happening around the world. We invite you to join us, and we also welcome you to help us plan future events. Now I'd like to welcome Engel, who's going to introduce our speaker.
Hi, everyone. I'm Engel. I'm a senior at Westfield High School, and I've been attending Hebrew school here since I was in second grade, and I've been part of LFT, Leaders for Tomorrow, since last year. LFT is a program with AGC created for teenagers who seek to be advocates about anti-Semitism, and we were educated about how we need to be cautious as young Jews, especially on college campuses. This is why books like Scott Shay's Conspiracy U, a Case Study, are so important to Jews everywhere. It hones in on the dangers that Jewish college students face on campus and how they can stay safe. Scott, other than being a novelist, is a leading businessman and thought leader. He earned a BA in economics and a master's in management from Northwestern University. Scott is a distinguished leader in the Jewish community and an avid student of religion and its application to the world outside of the synagogue, church, or mosque. Thank you so much for joining us today, Scott. And everybody, please give him a warm welcome as we delve further into his new book, Conspiracy U, a Case Study.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ed Israelo, and I've recently joined the Israel Engagement Committee, and I'm very excited about that. And I want to welcome Scott here this evening for what I'm sure will be a very interesting and an informative program. Scott's book came out very recently in October. And Scott, your book takes a deep dive into anti-Zionism and conspiracy theories using a case study of two professors from Northwestern University. How was your attention drawn to their work and to the pervasiveness of this issue at Northwestern?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I want to thank, it's a pleasure to be, and feel very warmly welcome to the Temple Emanu-El community. I appreciate that very, very much. And I also have to give a shout out to Dave Golish, who I've known we met in kindergarten, so I've known him for 40 years or so. He's been really a friend and a source of encouragement and support for a long, long time. Thank you, David. And frankly, Northwestern University was a place of support and encouragement for me too. I was an undergrad there. I tell the story in the book how I almost had to drop out in the winter quarter of my sophomore year because my parents had a financial setback and could no longer afford the tuition. I couldn't afford the tuition. I cobbled together some money, and Northwestern actually played a very important role and supplied some extra money at a critical time. And I had a tremendous experience there. I learned a lot from my MBA. It allowed me to go to Solomon Brothers, which is actually how I met Dave, and have a career there. And I really, words can't express how much I really loved and appreciated Northwestern. I started giving money to Northwestern the year I graduated, right after the year after I graduated, and I gave money every year since. So I truly wrote this book out of sadness, not anger. But it started life, this book started life as a 2,500 word article in that was going to commemorate the 75th anniversary of my father's liberation from Dachau. And at the time that I was at Northwestern, and I was going to tie it into some lessons that I learned, this professor by the name of Arthur Butts, who was a tenured professor of electrical engineering at Northwestern, who created something called that's been named the Butts algorithm, that solved this problem called the Hilbert space curving problem that substantially enhanced computing power. I mean, it's not a complete exaggeration to say that the people at home might not be watching this, or it would be a few years from now until they'd be watching this without Professor Butts's early tremendous expansion of computing power. So he's no slouch, he's no dummy, he's actually brilliant. At the same time, I dived into reading his book, The Hoax of the 20th Century. And I hadn't done that. I had been a student. I thought he was just a neo-Nazi, just hated Jews. And I thought that was the end of it. This is some guy who's got problems. But when I read his book, it's a 500 plus page book, heavily footnoted. I learned that he says that he's not really against Jews. At heart, he's an anti-Zionist. The Zionists, he thinks, created this myth of the Holocaust, and he creates a conspiracy theory around it. And it's going to be a little bit of a long-winded answer to your first question, but it's important. Let me get this out, because he creates a conspiracy theory. Jew Zionists were such a moneyed evil cabal that they planted thousands of documents across Europe to trick people into thinking this Holocaust thing happened. They falsified documents from places like the Wannsee Conference, which, as many of you know, is where the final solution was devised. They falsified all sorts of things. He explains away Mein Kampf in times that Hitler says that he's going to wipe out the Jews as mere political stuff like goes on in Congress and other places. And he amazingly says, to use his word, bamboozles innocent, pure German Nazis, hapless German Nazis, to confess to crimes against humanity, to confess to killing people, to confess to participating in the concentration camps, even though they had nothing to do with it and nothing happened. So clever and crafty are these Zionists. It's unbelievable. It's like swimming in a cesspool without sunglasses, without goggles, to read his book. And I read it and I tried to figure out, how does a brilliant person believe in such lies? And it has a lot to do with conspiracy theories, and we might get to that a little later. At the same time, some of you may know, some of you may, since we're in the New York area, at NYU, a professor by the name of, not a professor, at the time recipient of his doctoral degree, Stephen Thrasher, made front page headlines because at the doctoral commencement, he jettisoned his prepared speech and talked about how proud he was of NYU for boycotting Israel, and how evil Israel is. And it was met by whoops and cheers at the commencement. So clearly lots of people, the majority of the doctoral students, recipients at NYU, agreed with him. And I continued to read the article, and it said that Dr. Thrasher was going to be the incoming chair of social justice reporting at Northwestern's Medill School. He was going to be the Daniel H. Renberg social justice chair. And then I read what he wrote. I read his tweets, and they are essentially conspiratorial. Evil Jews, Zionists, are conspiring with prison complexes, with police departments across the world to harm people of color. And he claims that Israel sends drones buzzing around Gaza to gas people, and they're doing that as an experiment to export it to the rest of the world. So for Stephen Thrasher, Jews, Zionists, and we can talk about the conflation later, are conspiring to harm all people of color. And for Butts, Jews, Zionists are conspiring to harm all white people. Little long answer, but that sets the groundwork.
So what would you say is the difference between a theory about an actual conspiracy and a conspiracy theory?
So this is critical, because this is where academia is falling down. Because you can have a theory about a conspiracy, and sometimes they're true. I mean, unfortunately, in Tuskegee with vaccines, there was a theory about a conspiracy to vaccinate men of color, not false and falsely treat, not bad, and do a whole bunch of harmful things. And it was true. People investigated it. There was documentation, and it was true. In a normal, theories about conspiracies are fine. You say, you think A, B, and C kill D. Now good, go do the work, see if it's true or false. That is what scholars are supposed to do. The difference between that and a conspiracy theory is that conspiracy theories are non-falsifiable. Anytime there is a problem found with the conspiracy theory, it just expands. So, and Arthur Butts is a primary example of that. So, how can there be all these documents that about the Holocaust and about the building of the concentration camps and about the purchases of Zyklon gas and et cetera? Well, it was forgeries. So the conspiracy expands. What about the testimony? Well, Jews were just great at bamboozling people. So every time you have an objection, the conspiracy just expands. The same thing is happening on the far left. So Jews are conspiring to hurt gays and lesbians, and they're part of the intersectionality of oppressed people. So we must have, in their view, a conspiracy theory, which many on the left have, that Jews are pinkwashing. In other words, they're not actually allies of LGBTQ plus people. They are doing that to convince the rest of the world of something evil. They're pinkwashing their bad practices. And of course, they leave out the fact that Israel stopped prosecuting homosexuality in 1953, far before any of this made anybody's radar screen. You have a professor at Rutgers. Her name is Professor Jasper Puar. She is this year at the University of Chicago as a distinguished visiting professor. She writes about, and she's bothered that when you look at the statistics, few Palestinians have been killed versus typical conflicts, just on a quantitative basis. So she has a theory, in that she writes about in The Right to Maim, that Israel directly doesn't shoot to kill, it shoots to maim, because it wants to ruin the life of Palestinians and not kill them and not have the statistics of deaths be high among Palestinians. She further contends that Israel is purposely starving Palestinians by controlling the food supply to Palestinians. I'm sorry, to the Palestinian community. She talks about organ theft among Israelis, because Israel does provide healthcare to Palestinians, and it provides healthcare in some post-traumatic, post-disaster communities. So Jews must be conspiring. That's the given. Therefore, why are they doing it? Well, they must be mining organs to give to other Jews and intentionally killing people. It is absurd. It is ridiculous. Even she, in some unguarded moments, has admitted essentially that she made it up. She says she turns the speculative into the now, but that doesn't matter because we're talking about Jews, so it's okay. And these conspiracy theories actually are quite dangerous because frequently they're politically motivated by people such as a Jasper Puar, who your tax dollars support here in New Jersey, and you support her research as well, and they bring in a whole bunch of susceptible people. People these days, and I get into it in the book, are extraordinarily susceptible, extraordinarily vulnerable to conspiracy theories in a way that hasn't been the case.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously gotten a lot worse with social media and the internet and so forth. So, Scott, you said that when you were at Northwestern, the motto of the university, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the motto from Philippians and the Golden Rule, was very present, but that your experience was really valuable because they kind of lived up to the motto and so forth. What do you think has changed in the couple of years since you've been there at college?
Well, it's more than a couple of years. The dinosaurs used to roam the Deering Meadow when I was there. A lot has changed. So I'm going to read the motto if I can here. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. So this is from Philippians. It's from the Christian scriptures. It's based on the Golden Rule in that you're supposed to try to figure out what's good about the other person. You're supposed to get good report, accurate report. You're not supposed to make things up. And what's happened at Northwestern, so sadly, is that it has become, as many universities, an ideological place. And I say that with much pain. But I talk about other professors at Northwestern. So I've talked about two, and I actually focus on those two. But there's a professor, Jessica Winigar, who wrote a book called Disciplining Anthropology. And the truth is, she co-authored that with Laura Deeb. And the truth of the matter is, you cannot understand this book unless you assume Jews, Zionists are evil. And one of the things that just was so upsetting was every time I found some trope on the right, I found the exact same trope on the left. So, unfortunately, being a Jewish banker, sometimes I'm referred to in with triple, I don't know if you've ever seen this, triple parens. And it's a trope on the right for echo chamber, for a whole bunch of stuff, for this person being Jewish, frankly. And on the left, in Professor Winigar's book, campus rabbi is in quotes. You can't actually be a campus rabbi. You've got to have some ulterior motive. You're doing something else. Jewish students in classes are moles. they're not really Jewish students in class. They're doing something else. Local Zionists, what they're really trying to do is harm anthropologists. So she has a theory, a conspiracy theory, that Jew Zionists are trying to oppress anthropology, that they are destroying and causing career consequences for anthropologists, that they're trying to seek to have anthropologists who are not compulsory pro-Israel, in her words, being denied tenure. She writes a whole book and then admits there are only 3 cases that she could find, 2 of tenure. They both ended up getting tenure. One who didn't applied and maybe didn't get a administrative position, but was already tenured. She admits they could find no evidence of any harm. And by the way, the Anthropology Association, American Association of Anthropologists, almost voted for a boycott of Israel. It was a very tight vote. The initial vote to put it on was something like 1,400 to 186. She's clearly not pro-Israel. She's got a great position at Northwestern. She's director of the Ellis Kaplan Center. She's got a full professor of anthropology, et cetera, et cetera. And they interview people who always feel always feel like they're being monitored, oppressed by Zionists. So they found that there's no evidence that Zionists have done anything to harm anyone. There's no evidence other than people feel that way, which is not consistent with the motto, because you're supposed to actually find actual evidence of something. Because I could say I'm being oppressed. You could say you're being oppressed. You could say everybody at the synagogue is oppressing you. And you would probably be directed toward professional help, not toward writing a book and get funding from Northwestern and be published by Stanford University. And I challenge anybody to read this book and without the assumption that Zionists are bad, really evil, and even comprehend this book. It's like you need the Rosetta Stone. And that's what's passing for scholarship, unfortunately. That's what isn't part of the Northwestern motto, and it's not part of the Golden Rule. And it's a big problem.
You say that anti-Zionism is a mask for anti-Jewish hatred. Can you explain, Scott, how these anti-Zionist conspiracy theories are just another iteration of anti-Jewish hatred that has been, unfortunately pervasive, through the centuries and across, various different cultures as well?
So I reviewed 2 books, or I read 2 books deeply that I mentioned in the book, and I have to cite them. One by Jason Byford and Javin Byford, and one by Qasim Qassim, who they basically went through as many conspiracy theories as they can find in there. Some are, most of them, I can't quantify the percentage, but most of them are politically motivated for one reason or another. There are a few that are okay. Paul is dead, Elvis is alive, those are okay. But by and large, they're politically motivated. And by and large, the strange thing is they all seem to have something to do with Jews. They were sort of surprised because they weren't coming at it from a Jewish perspective. Why should most conspiracy theories be about Jews? And sadly, that singling out of this moneyed, the supposed moneyed evil cabal is a common trope, and it goes to the right and the left. You can go back to the Middle Ages, where Jews were poisoning wells. You could go back to Appian, that Josephus wrote against. The Jews were conspiring. You could go throughout the Middle Ages for Jews conspiring, starting in the 10th century, but really taking off in the 12th was the blood libel. That Jews were selecting a country every year to to kill a Christian boy, use the blood for baking matzah. Again, a cabal, a moneyed cabal of Jews doing evil secretly to the rest of the world, and only the people with special knowledge could be able to figure this out. Clearly, that happened throughout the late Middle Ages, the Enlightenment. We're full of conspiracy theories. There's the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, of which a third of it was plagiarized from a French novel lampooning Napoleon III, but yet nobody seemed to care. I mean, it was almost debunked as soon as it came out. But if you read that, it was a whole sponsored set of conspiracy theories. And I'm going off on I went off a little on a tangent from there, but they all again seem to single out Jews. When my father was before my father was born in 1922, there was a conspiracy theory in his town about Jews killing a Christian boy with no victim, no body, no name, that really ended up impoverishing the Jewish community. Then there was another blood libel against Jews when my father was a young man, that again, in this time they named somebody and this boy turned up healthy a couple days later. So these conspiracy theories are dangerous. The Hutu power movement started its efforts against the Tutsis with conspiracy theories. The Turks started their movement against the Armenians with conspiracy theories. They're very dangerous, but most of them go against Jews.
How do you see anti-Zionism, at play both on the political left and the political right? And how has it moved, from academic institutions into sort of the culture and society as a whole and at large?
So that's a good question. So what happens on campus doesn't stay on campus because people are being taught they're going to go. Emily was kind enough to do an introduction. One day she's going to be a lawyer. One day she's going to be on the Supreme Court. And what she thinks is going to be important, and if all she thinks and her compadres, not you, but if all your compadres thinks is that somehow Jews are evil, it's a real problem. And it's a real prejudice. And we're seeing that with hundreds of journalists from the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, signing a document that they won't report anything positive about Israel anymore. In my book, on pages, since you have it, I'll say you should look at pages 206 to 212, where I talk about how anti-Zionist conspiracy theories are leaking into ESG investment. For those of you who know, environmental social governance investment. And unknown, again, hard to decipher that it's in there, but Morningstar Sustainalytics are using sources that are assuming anti-Zionist conspiracy theories in their investment criteria for ESG. So this leaks. What happens on campus doesn't stay on campus, and it's on the far right and far left. There's a far left myth that the far right is an anti-Zionist. But if you look at all, and there are a few populist parties that are on the right, but not the far right in Europe, that have embraced Israel. But if you look at the real far right folks, I mean, David Duke retweets what far left people say, and he calls the US government the Zionist occupied government. One of their tropes is the ZOG. And of course, on the far left, the assumption is that the government is controlled by the Israel lobby. Again, parallel after parallel. If you look at Congressman Green, who talks about Jewish space lasers causing forest fires, on the left you have Trayvon White, who's maybe a future mayor of Washington, saying that Jews are causing climate change with satellites somehow. I mean, the thing you're going to find in my book that shocked me is that anytime I found something that someone on the far left said, I found something similar that the far right said. I mean, it was stunning to me that I found something similar to that Arthur Butz says to what Jessica Winnegar says. almost, different words, but same idea.
You know, you mentioned the Marjorie Taylor Greene and the space lasers. It reminds me of the Mel Brooks movie History of the World, where at the very end they've got the sequel is going to be Jews in space, and they've got them, flying around in the planes in the form of a Star of David.
Well, that was one of David Chappelle's jokes, was Jews in space, as a matter of fact. It wasn't criticized,
right.
even though it was pretty anti-Semitic.
Why are biased professors and extremely ideological theories currently so prominent across academic institutions in the country, and what has kind of happened over the last several years to cause that to be the case?
Well, first of all, the issue in this I found is that people complain to administrations, people do a lot of things, but really the faculty is the power at universities. They determine tenure, and if you have a whole bunch of Arthur Butzes, they will, and we find this in certainly other countries, if you have people of like-mindedness, they hire like-minded people. I mean, there's no question that there's a lack of diversity intellectually at universities. And I can't imagine someone pro-Zionist getting tenure at Northwestern's anthropology department. I think it would be not possible. And I don't think in the American Studies department at NYU, where Stephen Thrasher got tenure, it would not be possible to be a Zionist. And so if you don't if the only way to distinguish yourself is by coming up with ideas of just how bad Zionists and Jews are, then it becomes more and more and more extreme. And what is troubling to me, and why I think this is an issue for every person interested in civil society, is that this isn't just about the Jews. This is happening, unfortunately, in an endemic way in universities, where students are being indoctrinated in many cases as opposed to taught how to think. And that's what the motto says. Look at facts, look at evidence, figure things out. Don't just take someone's word for something, even if it's a professor. I mentioned in the book a little bit, she taught part of the class, but I took some outside curriculars with her, Barry Watkins, who was very feminist. She's written about in the literature, I think, can't remember, second wave feminist or whatever, but she was a major feminist thinker. And, but heaven help you if you tried to say something you thought she would like to hear and you didn't have the facts to back it up, because she'd be able to make the exact opposite case very persuasively. And you couldn't get away with sloppy thinking. But now, if you just don't agree, you're in deep doo-doo.
Yeah, I understand that. Also, we've got a lot of people. There's going to be time for questions of Scott after our Q&A, and so if there are questions from people who are watching online, then they should put those in the chat box, and those will be available. It's interesting, Scott, because I understand that the gentleman who's been president of Northwestern for the last several years, Mort Shapiro, is a very pro-Israel university president. I guess he's retiring. I think I read sometime next year. But it's interesting that he's a real supporter of Israel.
Personally,
Jews.
I think he's a tremendous supporter of Israel, and I have deep respect for him. But the university, the faculty decide who are the teachers, and they guide a lot. And I write about it at the end. It actually happened after I wrote the book. Just before publication, I inserted a little bit in to talk about how NU community, not cops, who were established to they were established to get rid of Northwestern as a police department, and they wanted to not have the police as part of the whole defunding the police. They didn't think that police should be on campus and that Northwestern shouldn't have a police department. Now, you know what? You can make an argument that Northwestern shouldn't have a police department. I get that. Maybe it shouldn't. Maybe it should rely on the Evanston police and just bring them on when needed. It's a fair argument. I could have a conversation with you about it. But they claim that this was part of, so they nightly would protest in front of, at late hours in front of Morty Shapiro's house. And in cases, some cases, they had flags of pigs and chanted expletives about Morty, him and with respect to pigs and a whole bunch. And it was, and Morty Shapiro called them out for anti-Semitism. And they responded that Northwestern has a long history of anti-Zionism, and this is part of the this is part of the Zionists trying to oppress and stop the movement against expelling police or not permitting police on campus. Now, that's gaslighting. There was no Zionism involved. Calling Morty Shapiro a Zionist, like, how is that relevant to the conversation? But it is relevant if you read, of course, Professor Winnegar's book. It is, of course, if you, and I don't name all the names, but I footnote the names of the myriad of Northwestern professors who support these sorts of ideas. And I talk in detail about a fourth Northwestern professor too, but which we can get into. But you can't even understand what is being said without buying into conspiracy theories against Zionists.
You reference biblical stories throughout the book, Scott, and suggest that Northwestern's motto and the Golden Rule can provide universally applicable framework for comparing and assessing theories and ideologies. Since these both kind of originate from the same wisdom tradition, can you explain how they can be universally applied across all cultures and disciplines as a solid standard?
Yeah, well, the fundamental rule that Hillel summarized that the Bible is trying to teach us is, don't do unto someone else what would be hateful if done to you. Don't treat anybody in a way you wouldn't want to be treated. And that has huge, I like the more modest Hillel formulation of it, because even trying to do unto others as you would want done unto you is harder to understand than don't inflict any pain on anybody else. And part of that is treating people as an individual. Is would anyone really want these conspiracy theories put out against them? I think the answer is not. Would anybody really want others to assume that everything that they did was evil and have that be the assumption? I think not. And the Talmud says that the seal of God is truth. And by the way, Yale sort of has that on their seal. Yet truth doesn't seem to be what people are after. They're after the slogans and the shouting down. And I use a number of biblical stories where I give parallels in the book. But one I think is important, and I'll just highlight, which is the first conspiracy theory is actually explained in the Bible. It's in 2 Kings chapter 7, 8-ish. And it talks about, does any people remember the story of the 4 lepers? I don't know if you remember the story. So there's a situation where the Israelite kingdom is about to be destroyed. It had gone through 7 years of famine. And as sort of a bookend to the Solomon story that starts Kings, this story starts with 2 women and one eating their baby. I mean, it's really a terrible story. There's no food. There aren't any horses barely left alive. And the Arameans are about to destroy the Israelite kingdom. And there's 100, there's a lot of them, whatever the Bible says, they can't always follow the biblical numbers. A lot of soldiers, they're all ready to attack. And there's the only people in sight are 4 lepers, and they hear some noises, and they become convinced that these noises are that the Israelites hired kings to come and fight against them with no evidence. Now, armies are supposed to be used to gambits, pincers, false flags, diversions. And yet here, everybody became convinced among the Arameans of this conspiracy theory, and they fled by foot. And actually, there's the famous story of the Israelites coming into the camp and taking all the food, and the whole sort of world turns around on that. But conspiracy theories are really, really dangerous, and the Bible points it out. I mean, I could give some other examples from Egypt. They're really, really dangerous. The first thing we hear about the Jews as a people are, Havanit Chachma, is that there's this. The Pharaoh's worried that the Jews are going to plot against them and be a 5th column. So we have some early warning here, and we also have some things we can do to fight, I think, from learning from the Bible.
Thank you. What ideas do you have, Scott, about how universities can ensure academic integrity in the research that's done in the universities and in the scholarship that takes place in university campuses?
So I give 3 examples. I think it's going to be very hard. I don't think this is like an easy, there's nothing to snap your fingers because you have an embedded, ideologically driven faculty at many universities. But I think there has to be a grounding in teaching people to understand evidence and not being wedded to theory. We have to return to the environment where facts can negate theories. Used to be, again, when I was a student, if you had a theory, you put it up there and then you threw facts at it. And if the facts couldn't take it down, the theory could live another day. Now, if you have a theory, that becomes the guiding point. One academic that I spoke to said that she didn't actually like facts so much because theory was pure. Facts are messy. And that's the exact opposite of what we're supposed to do. So I make suggestions. And by the way, 14% of scientists claim that they know, not claim, but say they know science. They know other scientists who falsified facts to fit the theories. 70% of psychology experiments can't be replicated. Professor John Ioannidis writes about how most studies that you read about are false. And so we have professors not only in the Jewish world setting up theories which can't survive a confrontation with facts, and that's become okay. So I make some suggestions for how to combat that. I make some suggestions for teaching people, actually making a required course, how theories and facts have their places and how evidence-based learning is supposed to be how you learn. I think we need to actually put that in the curriculum. And I also put in the curriculum, I also suggest monitoring foreign donations. People talk about these Jewish donations, which are not really having any effect. If anything, they are supporting things that I don't think the donors would necessarily, in some cases, be so thrilled with. But Qatar gives $200 million a year to universities in the United States. Nobody seems to have a problem with that, even though they support at the same time Hamas, which wants to expel or exterminate every Jew from the river to the sea. If a donor were giving money to the Tamil Tigers or to the KKK, I don't think their money would be welcome at most universities. And Northwestern has accepted $500 million so far that's public from Qatar.
Well, it's kind of like the notion that George Soros controls the world type of thing. So, Scott, you've got a busy professional career and philanthropically and so forth. Tell us a little bit about the process of writing this book, how long it took, and what your hopes are in terms of getting this information out in the public domain.
So this, to me, once I started it, I couldn't stop writing. I couldn't stop doing research.
Went well beyond the 2,500 words.
Well beyond 20.
Very quickly. Yeah.
Well beyond. I went and I jumped through the rabbit hole of reading what was going on, and then I found it extremely disturbing. And this isn't something that I spent a lot of time talking about. It's not a book it is my third book, so I can write books, but I didn't really want to write this book. I actually had an idea for a different book in mind that was going to be my next book. But if we don't get this right, look, the Jews are the canaries in the coal mine. I don't need to explain that to anybody here what that means. And it's really bad for the canaries because they do die first, but it's also bad for everybody else. And it's bad for civil society. And we don't do well in societies that are rife with conspiracy theories. Jews do not do well. So don't other minorities, by the way. And if you look at 1930s Europe, conspiracy theories were as common as Indo-European languages. And I gave the examples before of the Hutus and of the Turks, who started what became the atrocities that they committed, the Holocaust that they caused with conspiracy theories. The Iranians and the Baha'i are another example, sadly. There was a mini Holocaust against the Baha'i. So this is really, really worrisome. And if we don't do something about it, we're in deep trouble. And it shouldn't just be up to the students. I mean, some people ask me, the most common question I get, and I'll bet there's one on from, questions from that are on the chat. The most common question I get is, how do we prepare students to face the predicament on campus? And you know what? It shouldn't just be up to the students. What are we doing? We're sending students to go fight. They should be going to learn something. I mean, that's not what their goal this should be. That's not what we should be doing. We have to get involved. Your taxpayer dollars here in New Jersey helped to produce The Right to Maine by Jasper Puar, which is a conspiracy theory. The whole thing is, you should read my book first. Read her book. Tell me if you can decipher it. Just tell me if you can even decipher what the convoluted conspiracy theories are. Just amazing. And yet that's what's happening, and nobody questions it. And the adults in the room need to recognize this is a serious problem. And if we don't do it, the good thing about the Jews is we always had the place about, speaking truth, being the other, having a different perspective. Well, now here's a time we can stand up. It's not fun. It's not easy. People have already questioned me in Northwestern why I wrote this book. I shouldn't have written this book. Why did I single out Northwestern? I've gotten response like that, but you know what? We're put on this planet for a purpose. We're not in it, and we got to recognize that and do something about it.
Terrific. What would you say the most important lesson that you would like readers of the book to take from going through your analysis, Scott?
Well, I mean, just what I actually it's time to do something, and it's up to us in the room and the folks on the Zoom and other folks who are paying attention. Because if we don't, it ain't going to be good.
And also for students like Emily, who's going to be going off to college in a year, and hopefully has learned some tools from this AJC Lift program to deal with that. Just kind of getting a little closer to home, Scott. This past spring at Rutgers, there were some anti-Semitic incidents that culminated in some vandalism at AE Pi, which is a Jewish fraternity on Holocaust Remembrance Day. And the chancellor and the provost, they issued a statement, basically acknowledging the sharp rise in anti-Semitic violence generally, noted recent incidents at Rutgers, but the joint statement also referenced other injustices in the country against Asians, Americans, against Muslims, etc. And then SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, they were outraged that the acknowledgement of anti-Semitism, could occur without condemning Israeli policy towards the Palestinians. The Rutgers chancellor then basically apologized for having failed to communicate support for the Palestinian community, and then ultimately, pretty new President Holloway came up with a statement deploring hatred and bigotry in all forms, but refused to apologize for standing against anti-Semitism. And of course, SJP was dissatisfied with that response as well. What are your thoughts, and what's your take on what took place at Rutgers 4 or 5 months ago?
Well,
Yeah.
ironically, Jonathan Holloway I've met because he was provost of Northwestern. So, it's like I read this and it was like, whoa. Because I had context. So first of all, I think that this notion that other people get to define anti-Semitism. So how many people in this room think only whites should get to define anti-Black racism? Can I see a show of hands? How many people think that we Jews should get to define anti-Asian bigotry? I could go on. So somehow Jews are the only ones who aren't permitted that. And I had to read, and I wrote in the book, I talk about JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace's book on anti-Semitism. Their basic thrust is that the only people who could be anti-Semitic, the only people for which there can be anti-Semitism are people who don't agree with them. In other words, if you are pro-Israel, you've got what's coming to you. That's almost precisely what it says. You've got what's coming to you. And so it actually justifies bigotry. And let's say after Kristallnacht that Rutgers put out a statement saying, we deplore broken windows. Broken windows are bad, and everybody who breaks windows should pay attention to that. Well, that wouldn't be actually that satisfying. And this is, again, you're in the room, you're New Jersey taxpayers. I don't see why this isn't something that needs to be more broadly embraced, because it so perverts every standard of academia. But it's happening to Jews, and so it's okay somehow. And the Jews should, there's a joke that my father used to say. Three Jews in Tsarist Russia were taken out to be shot by a firing squad. And the sergeant comes up and hands the first one a blindfold, and the fellow says, "Yes, please give it to me." Second guy is handed a blindfold, and he says, "Okay, I'll take it." The third guy spits in the sergeant's face and says, "I'm going to look at you as you do this." And the second guy leans over to him. He says, "Moishele, why are you making trouble?" It's time to make a little trouble on the anti-Semitism that people are just accepting.
Before we open up for questions, I also just wanted to state, and Scott knows this, American Jewish Committee and Hillel International in February are going to be hosting a big program, a 2-day program for university administrators, university presidents to deal with the incredible rise of anti-Semitism that has taken place on college campuses. It's going to be specifically addressing what unfortunately is happening at many institutions around the country. So at this point, I think we will open it up for questions. Questions in the chat box or questions from the group here.
Mark.
I was wondering if you could say a few words about how this is affecting Jewish students on campus. We were talking about all these theories. How are they being, how does it affect them? How hurt are they by this? Are they isolated? Those kinds of things.
Yeah, just so Mark's question basically is what's the impact on the on the students and how are they dealing with it, I think.
Well, that's a huge question because every student is dealing with it differently. And that's the reason why I don't think, by the way, that we should put this entirely on the students. I think it's totally unfair. They've got to live life. They want to, it's a place of exploring. It's a place of making new relationships. And I talk at the end about what happened at Northwestern after the incidents with Morty Shapiro, where the Jewish students, some of them felt gaslit, in that the NU Community Not Cops was an organization that many Jewish students actually very much supported, and somehow this all had to do with Zionism. People didn't even know what was going on. And at NYU, the bulk of the non-Jewish progressive organizations have said that anyone affiliated with a Jewish organization that is an anti-Israel won't be allowed to participate in their organization. So there's definitely a boycott taking place in some universities. At Oberlin or at Vassar, I can't imagine someone who expresses any pro-Israel views, getting to be voted above dog catcher in any progressive organization. So it's an issue. So many Jewish students and this is part of the goal in some ways, is they just try to park their Judaism at the door, park their Jewish experience at the door, and just make it quiet. And that works for most people. And you know what? I don't question or quarrel with that, because people are going to university not to have to deal with this. And sometimes it's put in their faces, and they do, but if they don't have to, the best solution for some people is just to, I'm getting my degree, I'm going to go forward, and not let fighting anti-Israelism be the defining part of their college experience.
Thank you. Other questions? Do you have anything? Nothing in the chat. Yes.
I'm David Sanders, GoCat. My son graduated in 2018. He was actually confronted with a lot of what you're talking about. I question the premise that they shouldn't be involved, shouldn't be responsible. We, I think, did a good job of educating our children on the issues that they're going to face. And to expect my son is going to take on the world, but they should be conversant, at least.
Oh, I agree with that.
Yeah. So that's but I had a true moment of cognitive dissonance. I'll call it, when Engel was in junior. The student council voted in favor of non-binding resolution. They voted in favor of BDS movement and sanctioning Israel and foregone investment. At the same time that Morty Shapiro was in Israel signing a joint resolution at King's College University to the assistant university of I wrote to him. One time I wrote to him, I said, I don't understand. I said, the students are running amok, the Jewish kids on the student council that voted in favor of boycott, divestment, and sanction Israel, and it just blew my mind. And so it's not a question, more just an observation that sounds like it's far worse at Northwestern than I thought. Unfortunately, Morty wrote back and said, yeah, we have to let them do their thing, don't worry, it's non-binding. But when he announced his resignation, retirement, and someone else is coming in, I don't know what's going to happen, but it sounds far more dire than I ever thought it was.
So let me just say this, it's better at Northwestern than many places. And the thing that we do need to make sure students know, and I want to stress this, Jewish students should know basic Jewish history. They should know that we're not settler colonialists. that Jews were only in Russia for 250 years at most, the Pale that was taken over from Poland. And this concept that Israeli Jews parachuted in from Europe is ridiculous. They need to know that Jews never left the land of Israel, and we were probably a majority in the land of Israel until maybe the 7th century, certainly the 4th century, and only became a minority when the Muslim conquest, which started in the 7th, 8th century through the 13th, 14th century, when which the Jews and the Christians that were there lost the majority. Jews are the indigenous peoples of the land of Israel. I fully believe that Palestinians have a historical claim, but that doesn't mean you have to negate the indigenous claim of the Jews. And I think that the demonization of what's going on is very problematic. People don't understand what apartheid is. Israel's not an apartheid state. They don't understand what settler colonialism is. And they're confronted with this on campus regularly. And the Northwestern vote was 24 in favor, 22 against, and with a couple of abstentions. And the two deciding votes were Jewish students. Now, fast forward to this past May, when there was another resolution put forward, and the vote, there were only 2 dissensions from the whole vote. Duke yesterday affirmed, the Duke Student Council affirmed not permitting students supporting Israel, or whatever the name of the organization is, being vetoed as a legitimate campus organization. There were actually no dissensions. There were some abstentions. So this has become the hegemonic belief, and it's truly, truly troubling. But we need to, what we do need, and I want to come back to this, is we need to teach basic Jewish history, because what astounds me is how many students don't know that there have been Jews in the land of Israel since for 3,000 years, never having left.
I'll also echo that. I graduated Northwestern 15 years ago, and I think my question is how did things change so quickly? You know, that when I was there, Northwestern was largely seen as more or less politically apathetic. It was not the most politically active campus. If anything, my own student experience there was not one of protests and petitions and op-ed pieces, and I was active in at least 3 different Jewish organizations on campus, and to not be a rabbi now, or not from my experiences at Northwestern. So how do things move as quickly from what I found to be a great experience? I mean, yes, Professor Butts was there and people knew about it, and every 3 years it sounded like there was some movement against him. How does it shift that quickly in just this short time span?
So I thought about that too, because just the time frame from the BDS resolution you said, which barely passed, 1 different vote and it wouldn't have passed, to the resolution passing in May with only 2 no votes, both from Jewish students, parenthetically, was pretty quick. We're talking about a few years. And to note from at least it being debated to no dissent. You know, people, and this is why I wrote the book. So, I mean, almost passionately, and why I wrote it, it was 2 years, it was about 20 plus months. And I wrote it, for me, fast, because I have a full-time day job. And people think maybe, you know, there's a pendulum, things are going to go back and forth. I'm worried we're at a tipping point. And Northwestern and the fast transition is an indication of how we're at the tipping point. May 2014, when Jews in Skokie, in Los Angeles, Miami, Brooklyn, Queens, 2 blocks from my office were physically attacked. I have to tell you, I didn't experience personally anti-Semitism, you know, directly in my face. You know, yes, on the dark web, because I'm a Jewish banker, but I mean, until November, of last year when I was on my way to an outdoor service because it was my father's yurt site. I'm sorry, it was my mother's yurt site. It wasn't my father's yurt site. It was my mother's yurt site, but I'm going to the service and I put on my kippah. I really didn't think about it. Left home with the kippah on. And someone started shouting at me. I mean, for almost a whole block. And I mean, like, how did that happen? You know, people didn't do that in the streets of New York City on the Upper East Side.
Rabbi.
Are there any universities that you think are addressing conspiracy theories or anti-Israel sentiments effectively?
You know, I haven't found any really good positive examples. I don't think it's a problem everywhere. Someone mentioned Syracuse. I haven't heard any issues at Syracuse. And there are universities that I'm sure are doing something. But the ones I ended up researching, I just, in all honesty, the ones I'm researching are the ones that have issues. So I can't really tell you. I mean, people tell me the University of Maryland is in good shape. And I'm sure YU is doing okay. But I didn't analyze those. So I can't tell you for sure from my research.
You have something from the chat, Mark?
Yes. How do you reconcile do something policy with the principles of freedom of speech and academic freedom? Isn't good speech the antidote to bad, evil, conspiracy speech?
100%. That's why shouting down, demonizing, removing from the public square pro-Israel speech is so problematic. I mean, BDS is not about freedom of speech. It is about anti-normalization, saying, no, Zionists, you don't have the right to speak. That's what they say. I mean, go to their website. You don't have to take my word for it. BDS is anti-free speech. And yet, in the same way that we've had so many things turned around against us, where anti-Semitism sometimes is defined only by people who are anti-Semites. And indeed, one thing I mentioned in the book is that the definition of anti-Semitism was actually invented by an anti-Semite by the name of Wilhelm Marr, because he didn't like the term Jew hatred because it was a little too obvious. So terms and words are being used against us. And I mean, you're not allowed to say that Zionists, that Israelis aren't settler colonialists on campus. You have to understand that they are. So the answer to that is BDS. I don't think it should be by the way, I will tell you, I think you have the right to advocate BDS, and that's fair, but you should have the right to advocate for Israel. That should be fair, but it is not considered fair.
Yes.
You made a point earlier about the ESG messaging about the media, about conspiracy theories are now permeating corporate America. So that really, I peeked a little bit at the chapter. It's very, very alarming and disturbing to me. I mean, ESG is everything. We will not be able to invest all of these billions and trillions of dollars without a good Morningstar rating. And I know that there is a lot of financial professionals out there in charge of this that would be infuriated. It's a very strong philanthropic Jewish population with a loud voice in finance. So I think not only do we have to educate college students and the families, we have to start educating the business world, because they won't. I mean, I would think that eventually that they could try, do something or flash this out. It's almost exactly opposite all the diversification, all the diversity and inclusion training that people are getting to single out certain specific inclusion in businesses.
That's why I wrote it. I 100% agree with you. Now, I have, because of my day job being chairman and co-founder of Signature Bank, actually have people that I talk to who are in senior positions at major firms. And some of them are actually to some degree aware that there's a problem with Sustainalytics. And it's and I think there needs to be more of an uproar, because there hasn't been, your number of $53 trillion will be invested under an ESG rubric in the next couple of years. And we have a quiet boycott of Israel that nobody's talking about. That's more effective than campus resolutions. Morningstar, by the way, Sustainalytics, quotes from campus resolutions as to one of the reasons that create controversies for companies, and that's a reason you should invest in them. That's why, by the way, the BDS movement, do not think for a second that they are not extraordinarily smart and clever and strategic, because it's a building block. I mean, on their website, they say, look, we think everything Israel should be boycotted, but we're going to accept people like Ben & Jerry's. They don't use Ben & Jerry's as an example, that are just boycotting the territories because that's a way to get people involved. And they're very smart. We're going to pass campus resolutions, and then we're going to get Sustainalytics, a subsidiary of Morningstar, to quote from those to say you shouldn't invest in the companies. I don't know that that's happening with a lot of other companies. I don't know. I don't think anybody's quoting resolutions against French companies from universities, and there's no push to create those sort of resolutions. So I encourage you to get the message on that out there. It's a real problem.
Yeah, but I think part of what you're talking about is arguing facts with rhetoric, and it's really hard to push back against the rhetoric of the big machine. They have much better PR than we do.
I agree, but that's my point. We've got to return to a world where facts negate theory, as opposed to theories negating facts.
Arlene?
I think this is far more pervasive and insidious than what we just said. It's something that I think is burden a lot to as I read the New York Times every morning, it clearly assumes that Israel is exactly as is being suggested, their settlers taking over the hardly the indigenous population there. Okay, and it is not a conspiracy theory. It's just written as these are the facts, and millions of people are reading these facts every day from the source that we think is reliable. I mean, I don't know how you deal with something that isn't really a conspiracy, isn't just on universities, but it's the media which is supposed to be giving us the facts. This is given to us as facts. If you read the article, it's not an opinion, it's given us the facts.
Yeah, but that's to my point, is that is what happens at universities as in state universities. Professor Thrasher is a professor at the Medill School of Journalism. He is teaching students who will later become reporters for the New York Times. And the assumption is, as you put it, that Israel bad, Israel evil, Israel must be having ulterior motives. And so we got to start. The best place to start is upstream, not downstream, and start. Start at the university. We need to start soon at the university.
There's comments on the chat that they'd like the questioners to get a microphone. They can't hear the question.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Yeah, I think one last question, if there is one out there. Is there another one on the chat? Yes, Shoshana.
As a mother.
You want to speak up, or you were?
It's been kind of brought up, but as a mother of a high school student, and a lot of us are going to be looking at colleges, or some are already applying to them, how do we decipher from a school that might give a more positive take on all of this than
So the
others?
first thing I would say is that everyone should send their child to Israel before they go to college. I don't know if your children have gone before, but before they go to college, because then they're going to see this isn't an apartheid state. You know, more than half of Israelis are people of color themselves, that Israeli Arabs are pharmacists, doctors. They're 40% of the pharmacists, 20% of the MDs, 40% of the women, 40% of the computer science department at Technion are now women, and now Arabs, and the majority of them are women. I might have that boxed up a little, but it's approximately right. You know, despite the fact that someone wants to cheer and say that, you know, Israel is an apartheid state, like, that's just wrong. So the first thing I think is important to do is to actually have people understand and see facts and not have to take the word for some college professor who doesn't have a clue, but wants to spout. And that's the first place I'd start. And then I think you can do the research, because there are universities that are worse than others. And you can pay attention to those. And there are universities with large Jewish populations that are somewhat better. But if you go to Oberlin or Vassar or Bowdoin, I mean, there are signs out, you know, free Palestine. I mean, that is like, it's like drinking water, is to believe that Israel is a bad place. And so those places where clearly Zionists are unwelcome, you have to think twice about.
Scott, on behalf of the Israeli Engagement Committee, the entire temple wants to thank you for joining us again. 2 years. 2 years ago, you did a Zoom with us on your book In Good Faith. And 31 years ago yesterday, you were here for my daughter's bat mitzvah. Our temple has a new rabbi. It was fun then. Our temple has a new rabbi who started the Israeli Engagement Committee. Tonight is the first major event the committee has sponsored, and many more events are in the planning stage. God willing, a large number of temple members will join the rabbi on his mission to Israel next summer. And Federation is having a mega mission in 2023 that we're going to have at least 1,000 people from the whole community going to Israel. Your book covered historic anti-Semitism as well as the disturbing actions that take place on many college campuses. Westfield, the town we're at, has had 3 instances of anti-Semitism the last year. One is as recent as 2 weeks ago. For those who are unaware, Federation, American Jewish Community, Hillel, AIPAC, and several other Jewish organizations are attacking this issue head on. If you could, send them a check. Again, thanks for your book, and thanks for your mark, Scott.
Thank you.
And thanks for coming.
Dave, hold on, watch your step.